A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
In an ever-increasingly complex world, anxiety can be debilitating and cause unnecessary stress and pain in our lives. But what is anxiety? I'm going to be joined today by an anxiety coach, speaker, author and podcaster. Her name is Dr. Jodi Richardson, and she joins me now. Dr. Jodi, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Dr. Jodi, can you tell us all what anxiety actually is?
I'm so glad you started with that question. So basically, anxiety activates our stress response, and it occurs when we're anticipating a threat. Now, that threat, once upon a time, might have been a threat to our safety, but in fact now, if we're thinking about getting on a plane or maybe doing a big presentation, or for our child going to school if they're not sure who they're going to hang out with, or they've got a big project, thinking about anything like that can activate the threat system in the brain and can cause a whole host of physical signs and symptoms like a racing heart and cause us to worry a lot about what might happen.
Yeah, so it's basically a mental journey we go on where we're anticipating something that could or may not even happen, but it really affects our whole system, doesn't it? Not only affects our brain, but it affects our body, our emotions, and really our whole sense of well-being.
It does, and if we were to play the Jaws theme right now, just those two notes, that alone, just having that music playing, could activate that threat system. So yeah, it's very much a bodily response as well as a lot of fear and worry that we think about.
Yeah, so you're an anxiety coach. So can I ask, how big an issue is anxiety in our society today?
It's huge. It's a huge issue. It's actually a global issue, and anxiety is the most common mental health diagnosis or mental illness, if you like. And we know that it's so debilitating. For anyone that has anxiety that is a problem, remembering that anxiety is completely normal, but when it's a disorder, it's incredibly debilitating, affecting work and school, relationships, family life and quality of life, and something that I've lived with since I was a little girl, so I know it well.
Yeah, so would you say the trend is definitely up as far as anxiety in society and the impacts of anxiety on society?
Yeah, it is. The pandemic actually increased rates of anxiety and depression actually by about 25%. And it's really driven by so much uncertainty. So even though a lot of people who struggled in the pandemic have really improved in their mental health because they're back to work, back to school, back to activities, back to connecting with people, there absolutely is an increasing challenge of anxiety in the community.
Yeah, and it's interesting because even in the Bible, the Apostle Paul, one of the greatest Christian leaders who ever lived, he listed all of the troubles he faced in life, and he was beaten up, he was flogged, he was imprisoned, he was shipwrecked. I mean, he didn't live an easy life. He was even thrown into a gladiator's den with some wild beasts in a city called Ephesus at one stage there. And but he said the other thing that really troubled him in life was the care or the anxiety for all the churches he'd started around the world, which were all kind of under a little bit of persecution. So anxiety is nothing new because he was experiencing it. But like you said, Dr. Jodi, it seems to be way more prevalent just in mainstream society now, doesn't it?
Oh, it really does. And, you know, it was a problem before the pandemic. The pandemic has really created a whole lot of more challenges, but also there are other things about life that are really driving anxiety. And as we know, economic pressures for a lot of people are creating a lot of anxiety, and the brain kind of anticipates what if there's not enough money, you know, and that's considered a threat by the brain, and the body responds accordingly. You know, other things like, you know, overseas unrest and wars, political instability that we're all kind of keeping an eye on overseas as well. You know, and a lot of people are really disconnected from others, and that's why faith communities are so important. But in light of what you were just saying about anxiety being around forever, it's actually protective. It's actually the part of our brain that helps us stay alert to danger, and it shows up around what we care about. So it's not something we can get rid of. We wouldn't want to. We just need to know how to recognise it when it's showing up, when we're actually safe, but our alarm has sensed a danger somewhere, the alarm in our brain.
Yeah, so it's really about managing it. So this is a million-dollar question, Dr. Jodi. How do you help people deal with anxiety?
One of the things that I love for people to do is to really understand it, because when we feel anxious in our body, it can feel frightening. It can feel really frightening. And in fact, anyone who's ever had a panic attack, really what happens is we feel the anxiety in our body, we don't understand it, and we get anxious about what we're feeling, and we might think, oh goodness, am I having a heart attack, or I can't breathe properly, what's going to happen? So really understanding it, normalising it so that everybody knows it's completely normal human response. Everybody experiences it. Normal anxiety settles down when the stressful situation has passed. Anxiety that's a problem is frequent, it's extreme, and it's stopping people from doing the things that, day-to-day activities that they really like to be doing. I also really like to help people learn how to settle the symptoms. And one of the things I love for people to know is we can't think our way out of it. We need to use a body-based strategy to help settle our anxiety.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, so it sounds like if someone's really troubled about and with anxiety, they should really seek professional help to differentiate. Is this normal anxiety, which everyone experiences, or is this actually extreme and it's a condition and it perhaps needs a little bit more professional focus?
Yeah, exactly right. I really appreciate that you've arrived at this point, because if anyone is listening and you're thinking, gosh, I'm not sure if it's an issue, even if you're just wondering, go and see your GP. General practitioners are brilliant when it comes to really supporting decision-making around what to do and what's necessary. And sometimes a GP will say, hey, yes, you're feeling anxious and you've got really good reason, and they might just sort of monitor you. Other times they might say, hey, I reckon you could do with some extra help, and they'll support you to connect with the professionals that will be able to support you through the journey, or support one of your children if you're a parent and one of your kids is struggling.
Yeah, excellent. And tell me, have you got some great stories of people who have actually worked through anxiety and really improved their quality of life?
Oh, my goodness, yes. There's a couple that come to mind. One is my own, and another one is of a young boy. Would you like an adult or a child-related success story?
Well, you know what, Dr. Jodi, people can argue with our ideas and our theories on everything, but they can't argue with our personal story. So I'd love to hear your personal story.
Oh, yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah, so I started having my first symptoms of anxiety when I was 4. I was a little preppy at school. And, of course, it wasn't understood then that that's what I was experiencing. It's only in hindsight that I can see that. I really had undiagnosed anxiety until my mid-20s. Unfortunately, my undiagnosed anxiety eventually led my brain and my body to say, hey, we can't kind of do this anymore. And I ended up experiencing a major clinical depression, or major depressive disorder, I should say. But even though that was really, really incredibly hard, and anyone listening who's been through that or knows someone who's experienced depression will know just how hard it is. Even though it was really tough, it was actually, for me, it was like, oh, I actually really feel so awful. Something must be wrong. I need to get help. Whereas prior to that, the way I was feeling with my chronic anxiety, I didn't recognise that to be any different to how anybody else lived.
Can I ask you, Dr. Jodi, when you had that complete breakdown, were the people around you surprised? Did they look at you and say, wow, you're young, you got so much going for you? Was there a lot of a lack of understanding on the part of your closest friends and family who just couldn't understand where you're at?
I really worried that there would be, because if you had looked at my life, you would have thought I had every box ticked. I had a job I loved. I had a partner who I then married. I was playing sport. I had my physical health. I had lots of friends and a great social life. And so I really worried that people wouldn't believe me and wouldn't understand. But what I learned was that they could see so much about me and the way that I functioned that I couldn't see. And so it was no surprise to them that anxiety was the ultimate diagnosis, and depression was kind of my pathway to getting that diagnosis. And everybody around me was incredibly supportive. I was just so loved and really looked after. It was really tough for my parents. I was still living at home. I was one of those, late to leave.
Yep.
And yeah, it was incredible. And I found an excellent psychologist. Third time lucky, I found a great psychologist. And ultimately now, I thrive with anxiety. I'm medicated for it. I live a really rich and meaningful life. I still get anxious. I feel a bit anxious now because I had 2 coffees today. I should have only had 1. But, there's so much life on the other side. But professional help, for those of us that are struggling and really being affected by it, professional help makes all the difference.
Yeah, so for you, it was seeking professional help, learning management, strategies and keys, which in your case involves medication as well, but it's actually brought you out on the other side in a much better state and a much happier lifestyle.
It has. I know when I feel anxious, I know what to do. I know that anxiety will often say, don't do it. Don't write that email. Don't post that post. Don't record that episode, because anxiety wants to protect us and keep us safe. And so much of what we do in life feels threatening to the brain. But if we can recognise that that's what's happening, we know what it feels like in our body, we know how to settle it down and what lifestyle actually helps to protect us against extra anxiety, things like, fiercely protecting our sleep, moving our body regularly and not drinking too much in the way of caffeine, depending on how that affects you, then, we really can manage it, dial it right back and do all the things that we want to do, even though sometimes anxiety will say, stop, don't do it.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Dr. Jodi, you also have a podcast. Quickly tell us how people can access your podcast, listen to it. I'm sure there's hours and hours and hours of really helpful information and stories on your podcast. So what is your podcast called and how do people access it?
It's called Hello Anxiety, so WELL, Hello Anxiety with Dr. Jodi Richardson, and you can find it on any podcasting platform. And what people find with the podcast is that it is a place where, because I'm a host who understands anxiety from every angle, and I have such compassionate, supportive, interesting and knowledgeable guests, people find it's genuinely helpful. So I hope that it might support some of your listeners as well.
I'm sure it will. Dr. Jodi Richardson is an anxiety coach, a speaker, an author and a podcaster. I encourage you to check out her podcast, Hello Anxiety with Dr. Jodi Richardson. I would love to just thank you, Dr. Jodi, for joining us on 2020 Today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.